Jungkook slammed the door to his apartment shut, his breathing uneven. His hands shook as he pressed them against his forehead, his mind replaying Taehyung's words over and over. It's better that way. Then why did it feel like a lie? His chest tightened as he stumbled toward the couch, dropping onto it with a frustrated groan. He buried his face in his hands, but the moment he shut his eyes, flashes of last night flickered through his mind. Warm fingers tracing his skin. A low, steady voice whispering something he couldn't quite catch. The feeling of being held, strong arms supporting him, a steady heartbeat beneath his cheek. And then, Jungkook's breath hitched. "Tae, don't go," his own voice. His eyes snapped open, a cold sweat breaking across his skin. No. No, did he really say that? He gritted his teeth, shaking his head violently as if that could erase the memory. But it wouldn't go away. It was there, clear as day now, seared into his brain. Jungkook had begged him to stay. He let out a sharp exhale, running a hand down his face. No wonder Taehyung looked at him like that this morning. No wonder he walked away so quickly. Jungkook clenched his fists. The worst part? He wasn't just embarrassed. He was terrified because a part of him meant it. The atmosphere in the office felt heavier than usual. Or maybe Jungkook was just too hyper-aware of it. He kept his head down, fingers gripping his pen as he stared at the documents on his desk. He hadn't seen Taehyung all morning, and that should have made him feel better. But instead, it made his anxiety worse. Would he act normal? Would he pretend like nothing happened? Or worse, would he acknowledge it? Jungkook's chest tightened. A cold shiver ran through him when the sound of heavy footsteps neared his desk. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The entire office fell silent as Taehyung strode in. His presence was like gravity, commanding attention without effort. He was dressed in a black suit today, the first few buttons of his shirt undone, revealing the sharp collarbones Jungkook wished he wasn't staring at. His grip on his pen tightened. Meeting. My office. Now, Jungkook's breath hitched. Taehyung's voice was as calm and unreadable as ever, but there was an edge to it, one Jungkook wasn't sure was real or just in his head. He hesitated for a second before nodding. Yes, sir. A flicker of something passed through Taehyung's eyes at that. But it was gone before Jungkook could decipher it. Without another word, Taehyung turned and walked away, and Jungkook could do nothing but follow. The door shut behind Jungkook with a soft click. Silence. Jungkook stood there, tense, as Taehyung leaned against his desk, arms crossed. His gaze was piercing, unwavering. You remember, it wasn't a question. Jungkook's stomach dropped. He opened his mouth to deny it, to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. Because he did remember. And Taehyung could see it. Jungkook clenched his jaw, forcing himself to straighten. It doesn't matter. Taehyung's eyes darkened. Doesn't it? Jungkook forced out a bitter laugh. Nothing happened, right? That's what you said. Taehyung didn't react. He just continued staring, his expression unreadable. Jungkook took a shaky breath. So why are you looking at me like that? A beat of silence. Then, I stayed. Jungkook's breath caught. Taehyung tilted his head slightly, his gaze locked onto Jungkook's. You asked me to stay. And I did. Jungkook's fingers curled into his sleeves. His heart was pounding. But you said, I know what I said. Taehyung's voice was low, controlled, but there was something beneath it, something unspoken. Jungkook swallowed hard, his body betraying him as a shiver ran down his spine. This was dangerous. Taehyung was dangerous. And yet, Jungkook was the one who couldn't look away. Jungkook felt like the air in the office had thinned, his breath coming in shallow inhales. Taehyung had just admitted it. He had stayed. He could have left Jungkook passed out in his drunken mess, called someone else, let him be someone else's problem, but he didn't. And now, standing here, staring into Taehyung's dark, unreadable eyes, Jungkook didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. He swallowed, forcing his voice to remain steady. Why? Taehyung exhaled slowly, his gaze unwavering. Why? What? Jungkook's nails pressed into his palms. Why did you stay? Taehyung didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the space between them, slow and deliberate. Jungkook instinctively took a step back, only to feel the sharp edge of the desk behind him. Trapped? Taehyung stopped right in front of him, his scent washing over Jungkook like a wave, spiced cologne, faint traces of whiskey, and something inherently him. The silence stretched. Jungkook's pulse roared in his ears. Taehyung's voice was low, quiet. Do you really want to know? Jungkook did. He hated how much he did. But the weight of that question, the way Taehyung's eyes seemed to look right through him, sent alarms blaring in his mind. So he did what he always did when it came to Taehyung. He lied. No, a beat. Then Taehyung smiled. Not his usual smirk, not his sharp, condescending grin. This one was different. Almost knowing. Jungkook's stomach twisted. Good, Taehyung murmured, his voice dangerously soft. Then let's not talk about it. He stepped back, the warmth of his presence fading as if it had never been there at all. Jungkook's knees nearly buckled in relief. Taehyung turned away, picking up a document from his desk as if nothing had happened. The meeting's at 2 p.m. Don't be late. Jungkook didn't move. He felt unsteady, like the floor beneath him had shifted in ways he couldn't understand. Nothing had changed. And yet, something had. Jungkook tossed and turned in bed, the events of the day replaying over and over. He should be able to shake it off. Should be able to forget the way Taehyung looked at him. The way his voice dropped an octave when he stepped close. The way his body felt too aware of Taehyung's presence. But then, another memory surfaced. One from that night. Jungkook gasped as his dream shifted, warm hands ghosting over his bare skin. A whisper, so faint it could have been a dream. You're always running away from me, aren't you? Jungkook's breath hitched. His body jerked awake, his eyes flying open. He sat up in bed, panting. His heart hammered against his ribs. That voice, that wasn't from the memories he already remembered. This was new. A piece of that night he had forgotten. A piece of Taehyung. Jungkook swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. He didn't know what terrified him more. The fact that he was remembering. Or the fact that he wanted to. Jungkook stormed into Taehyung's office the next morning, heart pounding, hands clenched at his sides. He had barely slept. The memory from last night kept replaying in his mind, the warmth of Taehyung's hands, the whisper against his skin. You're always running away from me, aren't you? And now, standing here, facing the man who had haunted his thoughts, he needed answers. Taehyung barely looked up from his desk. Close the door, Jungkook did, but not gently. The click echoed in the office, sharp and final. Tell me the truth, he demanded. Taehyung finally lifted his gaze, eyes dark and unreadable. About Jungkook's fists tightened. About that night. About what really happened. A tense silence followed. Then, Taehyung sighed and leaned back in his chair, expression eerily calm. You really want to know? Jungkook's breath hitched. The same question Taehyung had asked before. This time, he wouldn't lie. Yes, Taehyung studied him for a long moment before speaking, his voice low and measured. You were drunk. Barely able to stand. I took you home because I didn't trust anyone else to. Jungkook's stomach twisted. And Taehyung's lips pressed into a thin line. And you wouldn't let go of me. Jungkook's breath caught. You kept mumbling my name. You. Taehyung's jaw clenched, something flickering behind his eyes. You asked me to stay. You wouldn't sleep unless I was right there. Jungkook's pulse roared in his ears. The image was so vivid now, the way his body must have curled into Taehyung's warmth, the way he must have clung to him without thinking. Heat crawled up his neck. Then why did you lie? Taehyung exhaled slowly. Because I knew you wouldn't be able to face it. Jungkook's breath hitched. And I was right. Taehyung's gaze darkened, intense and unwavering. Look at you now. You can barely stand the thought of it. Jungkook's body betrayed him. He took a step back. Taehyung noticed. And he smiled. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. But like he had expected this. Jungkook hated how that made his chest tighten. Tell me, Taehyung continued, standing up now, closing the space between them. What are you really afraid of? Jungkook swallowed hard. But the words wouldn't come. Taehyung took another step closer. You think I don't see it? His voice dropped to a near whisper. The way you react when I'm close. The way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Jungkook felt like he couldn't breathe. Taehyung's gaze softened just slightly, but his tone remained steady. You don't hate me, Jungkook. Silence. Then, say it, Taehyung murmured. Say you don't feel anything, and I'll let you go. Jungkook's heart pounded. He wanted to say it. Wanted to deny everything. But the words stuck in his throat. Taehyung tilted his head. That's what I thought. Jungkook's chest tightened. He hated this. Hated how easily Taehyung unraveled him. But more than that, he hated how much of it was true. Taehyung didn't push further. He simply exhaled, stepping back, giving Jungkook space. Go, he said quietly. Before you start remembering more. Jungkook didn't move. Because the worst part? He wanted to remember. And that terrified him more than anything.